All right, let me welcome everybody to another episode of Xpress Outdoors. Today we're going to do another State of the Waterfowl series conversations. And let me start out by introducing our guest today. We got Mr. Jim Ronquest with RNT-V up in Startgard today. And then we also have Cason Short with Bill Byers Hunter Club there. And he's actually in Memphis tonight. So welcome you guys to the conversation.
Thanks for having us.
So let's do a little recap of where we've been with the State of Waterfowl series, and go back to last year. If some of the viewers that got to follow that series, if you remember, we met down at Gros Savon back in the summer, June or July, and we had a panel of experts. We had Dr. Mickey Heitmeyer, we had Dr. Dave Duncan from Canada. We had Paul Link and Larry Reynolds from Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, along with Jimbo and Cason. And we sat down for a whole day and just discussed what is the state of waterfowl in the Mississippi Flyway. And we really addressed some really good questions. And we wanted to keep it as scientific as possible, and basically wanted to create this whole series just to educate the average hunter on really what's going on in the waterfowl world, and let them listen to the facts and listen to what's going on and then formulate their own opinions on, you know, some of the questions like where are the ducks. And so that's kind of why all this was created. And we certainly want to thank Express Boats for hosting this platform and allowing us to get this information out to the public. We were hoping to make this thing an annual event, but little did we know, come the 1st of 2020, we'd have something called coronavirus pop up. And so, as with just about everybody else in the United States, that kind of put a kink in a lot of plans. And so we kind of put this series on the back burner. But now, as we're coming up on the beginning of the 2020 waterfowl season and the ability to do Zoom meetings, we decided to go ahead and get a few of the guys back together real quick and have a conversation and do a recap of what we discussed, where we're going, and what the future looks like. And so that's kind of where we're at tonight, is just the three of us are going to get together and just sit here and resurrect some of that conversation and get this series going. And hopefully with these Zoom meetings, as easy as they are now, maybe we can continue the series on a more regular basis. So that's kind of just a recap of where we're at. Jim, I'm going to rely on you maybe on this next question. You know, it's last year when we met, I don't want to say we made some predictions, but we had some thoughts of what was going to come with the 2019 season. We had big floods up in the Midwest. Some of the corn didn't get planted, and we were kind of thinking that it might have been more or less a natural experiment on what was going to happen. Is how far would the ducks, would they make it to Louisiana and Arkansas? And so I think I just want to throw that out to Jim first, and then we'll move to Cason. Let's talk about last year's duck season with you guys. How was it?
You know, that's a great question. The part I'm gonna back up, it's a little redundant, but the natural experiment, because there was a lot of corn flooded out and didn't get planted in the mid-latitude states that everybody talks about. From my traveling around and my hunting, I didn't notice a great deal of difference personally. Cason may have a different opinion on what he saw on his farm, but I was kind of going, last night, I was going through my book. A guy gave me a book last year, and I kind of started keeping track of hunts, and I didn't get it till like December. But anyway, I was kind of flipping through it, looking at different places, hunting public ground here at home, hunting private ground around the country, different invites. And I had a pretty good duck season overall. Had good days and bad, but to your point, there wasn't a huge difference of anybody that I talked to on private clubs or not that saw either a huge reduction in ducks or a big increase in ducks because of the corn. You could probably say some of our buddies with some property on the Missouri River that didn't have the corn they normally do had less ducks, but they still had a successful duck season. So in that, I don't know that we saw a lot of difference. Cason?
I didn't see much. It was better year than the year previous. So, you know, any uptick from there is welcome. We were a little stronger out of the gate through the first season there. And then in January, you know, Jimbo, we talked a bunch in January last year. We had a little bit, I would say, better weather patterns than the year before. So we got some more ducks moving on fronts. But by and large, numbers-wise, I don't know that there was any noticeable difference in birds that we were winning.
What about you, Doug? What about Gros Savant?
Well, you know, I was looking back. You and I actually got a chance to meet during the split when we talked to Luke Naylor. And we were kind of doing a recap of the first split at Gros Savant. And numbers-wise, we were pretty dang good. We were like 4.1 birds per man for the first split, which is a good average for a club of our size. But one of the things that we talked about was that we were not seeing the numbers of birds. You know, but the birds that we did see worked very well, and the kill numbers were still up. But for the first time in probably forever in my career of duck hunting, I can't remember sitting in the blind and just seeing empty skies for so long. Now, when we did see ducks, they worked well and the numbers were good. After our meeting, the second split started the following week, and we just absolutely crashed and burned. It was not good at all. Our numbers really fell off. And the birds that we did shoot were mostly divers that were kind of a secondary preference bird to shoot, but it was the only opportunities we had. So I think at the end we finished with right around 3 birds per man, which, you know, being we were so strong in the beginning, it carried us through the average. But for the most part, great first split, poor second split. So
do you think there's any correlation there to what you saw there versus mid-latitude and northern weather patterns, or habitat potential, say, here? You think there's any correlation there, especially here in your species composition was changed up?
Yeah, and you know, and anytime we get these clear bluebird days, we don't kill a whole lot. A lot of our successful hunts are weather driven, and we prefer a south wind and actually warmer conditions, you know, compared to you guys wanting to get a big blue northern. But those statistics kind of prove a theory, I guess, in our minds. What we think is happening is we get these early photo period birds that are coming regardless of weather. And those are the birds that are showing up right now. And then, you know, we get them through about the end of Thanksgiving. And then after that, it becomes weather dependent. And if we don't have something to drive that next wave of birds down, then we kind of tend to fall off in the second split. So I don't know. It was, you know, we're always optimistic every year that we're going to see more and more birds, but kind of to the fact that what you two guys just said, that whatever went on in the Midwest in the spring with corn related and floods didn't really change what we saw in Louisiana.
Yeah, I kind of all makes sense. You talk about those photo period birds. I was going to ask Cason. I noticed this morning mallards on places I hadn't seen them yet. Did you get a push last night that you could tell?
I saw some birds in places this morning that I hadn't seen them, you know, in the last week. It's been 75, 80 for almost a week now. Numbers wise, I don't think we really saw an uptick. And if you compare, you know, season to date last year, I would say overall our numbers are probably down a little bit compared to last year. We're kind of real close to that midpoint day that I talk about a lot. That was probably this past week. But a little different situation than last year. There's more water around. You know, we caught a 4-inch rain a couple weeks ago, and a lot of people in our area caught that rain. So there's more water, more habitat than a year ago to date. So I wouldn't read a lot into seeing lower numbers right now. I think they're probably just spread out some. But yeah, we did see some birds with this front moving. Hopefully see some more in the next week, because I think we're going to need some if we want to have a really good, strong opener.
Yeah, this is that week that there's always something happens, especially with mallards, more so than the others. And I know we've got a bunch of speckled bellies around us. So how is your speck population, Doug? Just out of curiosity.
Very few. We're seeing a few moving around early in the morning, but kind of what is interesting, and we're not seeing a whole lot of ducks yet, but what we are seeing is a lot of mallards, which we shouldn't be seeing right now. So one thing to take note also, though, is we had our September teal season, and we've got a lot to talk about in regards to weather in Louisiana that we'll talk about later with the hurricanes. But Gros Savant didn't commercially hunt teal because of the hurricane. We didn't have a building to lodge our guests in, but we did hunt as guides and we leased some stuff out, and we had a phenomenal teal season. So we had the teal, and they hung around quite a while, and there's still a few around. But if that's any signs of what to come, we did have a great teal season this year.
I know the teal hatch was really good this year. I think their overall recruitment was good. There's a lot of teal in the flyway, and overall population. We've still got several here. I noticed yesterday evening the field there at my house, ducks and geese both been hitting it really hard. But boy, dark yesterday evening, it's a pretty good show of little ducks that I think are feeding up, and they may have left on this north wind going to you today.
So, and we need to do a little better on our management. We're getting ready as we speak. You know, we're trying to cut our second crop rice. So some of our fields are still dry, but we're putting water as we speak right now. And I think in the upcoming week with the first front, and we get a little more water on the landscape in the fields, I think we're going to see some more birds show up. So it should get right.
You know, a side note to side note to your teal season there, I think the state of Arkansas as a whole had probably less rice cut this year than maybe in the last 30 years as teal season entered and opened. We had not cut any rice as teal season opened this year. So I wonder if that later harvest kind of maybe had an impact on you guys as far as birds you were seeing, maybe a little less habitat in our part of the world.
Very possible. Very possible. So I guess, you know, we kind of started on when my next question was going to be, was kind of talking about current conditions in the flyway. And I guess let me lead off, since we probably got the most to talk about in Louisiana. It's anybody's been watching the news, we got slammed by 2 hurricanes this year. Gros Savant took the eye of Laura, and then about 6 weeks later took the eye of Delta. I've done lost count of them. And then we've had Zeta come just to the east of us, and even right now with Eta that's out in the Gulf that's going to eventually hit Florida, believe it or not, we still are seeing slightly high tides, which is not allowing our marshes to drain. So the effects of the hurricane season this year on South Louisiana can be tremendous. Flooding wise, we didn't have any major issues at Gros Savant on Gros Savant properties. Because we were in the eye of the storm, I think we were kind of in the bowl of where the water got removed. But just 10, 20 miles to the east of us, there was a 20-foot surge. So all that salt water covered, you know, the majority of eastern Cameron Parish and into Vermilion Parish. So there's a large amount of acreage out there that's just completely devastated right now. Now, with that being said, anybody that had weed grass or that kind of submerged aquatics, that's all gone. But, you know, there's some long-term effects from the hurricane. There's been a lot of marsh shifted around and moved, and from an erosion standpoint, lost a lot of land. But short-term effects we've seen is once the water goes back down, you've got a lot of rotting vegetation, a lot of stuff breaking down, which creates a real bloom of invertebrates that's going to help a lot of ducks this year when they get here. So even though we've had a lot of devastation, I think when our water levels get back to normal and get down and get some big fronts to push some of that water out of the marsh, that some of these areas of shallow water that's got a lot of deteriorating grass is going to see a bunch of ducks. And the ducks that we have in Louisiana right now, although they're not widespread from what we can see riding around, there are pockets of birds, and they seem to be on these areas of high marsh that have already gotten the water off and they're bunched up. So even though we've had this devastation from a duck standpoint, duck food standpoint, there are some positives. So plus, in our case, also being rice farmers, you know, we had 2 events with up to 150 mile an hour winds across our second crop. So we've kind of pulled the combines out, and it's not really worth cutting a lot of it. So we're going to leave a lot of it for them. So we should have a lot of food in our area once everything gets flooded and gets right and get some fronts to push those birds down here. So I guess, you know, that's kind of where we're at in Louisiana. And, just while I'm on the subject of Gros Savant, our lodge is down currently. We took a lot of wind damage. We were in 150-mile-an-hour wind zone for 4 to 6 hours. So we got a lot of sheetrock work. We'll probably be down for about 8 months doing remodeling, but the owners have committed to build the lodge bigger and better. They're actually going to go in and do a complete renovation, and it's going to be better than it was before. So in the meantime, we've moved to one of our farmhouses. We call it Gros Savant East, and we're going to continue to hunt and fish out of that just in some smaller numbers. So we're still around, and we're going to be back in a couple months bigger than better than ever. So
good.
So what's going on, Cason, with you up in Arkansas? I know I've seen some pictures on Instagram. Looks like you're holding all the specklebellies for us right now.
Well, I don't think it's just us. Looking at, we'll touch on it a little bit later, but some of the telemetry stuff we're seeing, there's a huge population down in Jimbo's part of the world, and even further northeast of us. I get a lot of reports up there. So there's a bunch of WhiteFronts in Arkansas right now. It's been a different year for us. We had, another wet spring, late planting dates, and then because of hurricanes, had a really late start to harvest. I think everybody up here was ready to go, ready to hit the field. Hurricane hits, we get knocked back a week, and then after that, we caught another week of rain, almost steady. So 14 days there, sitting on the sideline, ready to start harvest, and couldn't get anything done. We cut rice in October this year for the first time in my memory, probably over 30 years that we've cut that late. So that could mean a lot of different things. You've got more waste grain that's left there, but mentioned earlier today, the unseasonably warm temperature we've got right now, any soybean that's laying on the ground is germinating. So you could be losing all the benefit that we saw from the late harvest as far as waste grain left in the field.
Also, too, with that,
go ahead, Jim.
With all the late rice cutting and hurricanes, we didn't get hit near like y'all did, but Delta come right straight up the gut. It went from you to us. Of course, all we got was a little bit of wind and some rain out of it. But that being said, I don't know that we're going to have the platoon crop that we normally have, whereas you guys are fortunate. You double crop easily. We kind of look forward a little bit nowadays with these earlier rice varieties that we can get a second crop. Even a natural return crop makes good duck food. And I'm not seeing as much as that as I have in the past. What about you, Cason?
It's pretty rare in our part of the world. You've got to have the kind of perfect storm to get rice to actually head out enough to turn down. It's not uncommon to see it, but a lot of times it's just blank heads. So to really get it to turn down and make grain is kind of a perfect storm. This year, with the way we planted early, which you guys got in the field about 2 weeks ahead of us, so you probably had a little more window, but definitely not in our part of the world.
And that 2 weeks makes a big difference. I'm going to back up a little bit, Doug. You let out with kind of how last year go, and because we couldn't do the duck count this year, just going off the hip surveys, I think I just recently read, typically Louisiana is the #1 overall harvest state. Every now and then it'll bump around to California or Texas. And it has hit Arkansas before, but as I understand this past year, we were #1 Mallard harvest state and #1 overall harvest state in Arkansas this past year. I don't know how that affects back to the Corn Belt or weather conditions, but that kind of goes inside when you were up here for the split, y'all having a tough second split in Louisiana and us having a decent duck season here. And most everybody I talked to said it was better than the year before. Excuse me. And with that, there was a lot of people with good mixed bags. Case and I had and a couple of buddies had a great green wing hunt early season up at his place last year. So I don't think that's going to be a long-term trend. I just think that's the way it hit. But back to last year was a decent duck season. I wanted to back up to that before we got too far along.
No, I'm glad you did bring that up because I have not seen the numbers yet. Since I have to admit, with the double hurricanes and all that's going on, my thought process has been on a lot of things besides researching duck numbers. So thank you for bringing that to the group.
If it's any consolation, all of our buddies and friends in South Louisiana has been on everybody's mind and been lots of prayers because we know what y'all have been through.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it, and we did get all those calls and text, and even the guys at Xpress came down a little bit and helped out. So it was it's certainly appreciated. It's nice to know we got some great friends around the country. So back to the conversation, I wanted to get with kind of rely on Jim. You've got a lot more insight than myself and Cason, probably a little north up in the Missouri and those areas. They've actually had some big weather events this year that caused some issues with farming up there. Won't you get us up to date on what happened in the Midwest?
They had a little early water up there, but as of right now, they've came out of it, at least most of the folks I know. Once they got started planting, they was able to get corn in the ground. Our buddies at Habitat Flats, they're looking good. Some of the big WMAs up there have good crops, good more soil crops, good everything. So they're all looking for a pretty good duck season, but they were rough out of the gate. They had a hard time getting started. And along with that, some of these early fronts they got some snow a couple weeks ago and sent some video, and it looked like Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's rather than early November. As of now, they're looking pretty good. So it'd be interesting to see how that, back to our experiment, how that affects from last duck season to this duck season, see if there's some carryover there.
So, we're trying to talk about the whole Mississippi flyway in general, and we've just now gone from Louisiana up to Missouri. We got halfway. Yeah, we can't complete the conversation without talking about Canada, but we don't have any reports from Canada this year. So won't you provide some insight on what's going on with COVID and duck hunting in Canada this year?
I got a little bit. One, just let's talk about duck production just a minute, and then I'll just give me a minute and I'll get over to the COVID deal. Canada duck production as we know it, even though we couldn't do the breeding duck survey like we've done in the past because of COVID, the reports we're getting from Canadian Wildlife Service and Delta Waterfowl and different folks on the ground, Saskatchewan didn't produce really, really well. Parts of Manitoba did. Parts of Alberta did. North Dakota had a really good hatch as far as I'm thinking mallard ducks in general. They produced a lot of birds in the Dakotas this year. Saskatchewan, not so much, which leads to the rule where Americans couldn't travel to Canada to hunt ducks, moose, bears, anything. And there's been a lot of talk go on. I know all y'all have had this same question. Man, you think it's going to make a difference because all the outfitters in Canada can't operate? Everybody asks that question. I think you're going to see a lot more pressure in the Dakotas and Montana that you normally do. But even with that, once you cross the boundary, you look at Central Flyway regs, you're looking at 6 ducks instead of 8 ducks, 5 of those being mallards instead of, in Canada, all 8 of them to be mallards. I think they're still going to see the pressure in the northern tier states. I don't know that it's going to make a big effect on the ducks that we see here any more than a good cold front, or if it's mid-January and it's been good and cold and we've got a good warm front, a good south wind blowing ducks back up to us from y'all. I don't know that we'll see a big difference in that, personally speaking. That's just my gut feeling. Y'all may think different, but even though they shoot a lot of ducks in Canada, it pales in comparison to what we shoot just in the Mississippi flyway, let alone nationwide. My friend John Devney at Delta Waterfowl and I got into this last year some, and he was pulling some old numbers, harvest numbers from Saskatchewan from the mid-'70s, comparing to Arkansas mallard harvest in the mid-'70s. And we were pretty nip and tuck. In the past few years, we're shooting over half the mallards Saskatchewan is. Now those were, let me preface that with those numbers were just basic numbers. I don't know how accurate they were, but if you take that same mindset and look at a bunch of us couldn't go to Canada and shoot ducks this year, as widespread as that is, and you don't know which way those ducks are going as they move through the Central or Mississippi Pacific Flyway, or even over to the Atlantic, I don't think folks in Arkansas, Missouri, and Louisiana are going to see that big a difference from America.
I think for Louisiana, I think the hope, if there's going to be any, is that maybe there'll be more juvenile birds make it to us. by the time a duck gets to South Louisiana, you got to be on your A game to be able to kill him. And so, I think we've been shooting a lot of adult birds down on this end of the flyway. So maybe there's a little hope that maybe a few more of the juveniles will make it down here. That's at least what we're thinking for.
And that was the next thing I was going to say. If anything, there's probably a little better less juvenile mortality, I guess would be the right way to say it. But I don't know that we'll see that big a difference. I think it'll be tough. I think there's a lot of those guys that were going to Canada, went to North Dakota, went to Montana, went to South Dakota, Minnesota. That's my gut feeling anyway. We'll see. We're going to find out.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't add anything other than what you guys said. I feel like most of it that didn't make it to Canada just lined the U.S. side of the border. And we're only talking about 10% of the continental harvest anyway. So, how big of an impact does Canada really have in any given year? That is an interesting point about age class distribution, something I hadn't really thought about that could you could see, I don't know if it'd be measurable results from that, but it definitely could be something a little bit different. The flip side of that, we're talking about Canada harvest and everyone that would be in Canada basically just went to the Dakotas this year. But something happened this year that hasn't in the last few. We got an early freeze in the Dakotas, and they locked up early and are about to, we got all that coming on again. It's been several years since everything's locked up tight this time of year up there. So, what you may see is some results from early freeze pushing a lot of birds down, and a lot of folks are probably going to draw a conclusion that, it's because Canada was closed. So, again, it's kind of like that silver bullet thing. There's not one in waterfowl hunting. You've got a million little things going on, and it's going to be really hard to tell which one made that impact for you.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And boy, do we ever live in an ever-changing world. When we had this State of Waterfowl meeting just a year ago, this situation wasn't even on our radar, much less in our thoughts, so it'll be interesting to see. We're going to go regardless. We're going to find out. So I guess before we leave conditions, does any of you two guys have anything to add to that before we switch gears on another question?
Well, I will add in about the weather conditions. It's interesting. Yesterday here at home, we were 82 degrees, which is kind of warm for us for early to mid-November. Not that it doesn't happen, but it's a little to the warm side. At the same time, I was getting a warning on my phone for a winter storm warning in Fort Peck, Montana. So that's encouraging. I remember the duck season in 1999. A lot of folks kind of judge everything by it was a great duck season for us. And I remember I never fought ice one time that year, and it was a dry duck season. We never had water in the bottoms. I only had to break ice one morning, and it was a record-setting year. But it was a perfect storm of duck production, weather up north, everything kind of hit. So I don't know. There's a chance we could maybe see a good one this year. Maybe not. But like you said, Doug, we're going to get up and go and find out. As a matter of fact, I'm leaving Friday morning for the Kansas-Oklahoma border. So check with me next week this time. I'll have another report.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Not to kick the hornet's nest, but Jimbo, what else did we see on the horizon in 99?
Man, let's see.
I'll give you a hint.
The spinner. Yeah, the spinner. Brought every battery you could from Forest City to Stuttgart, man. I sent my wife to Walmart, Kroger, and every place else to buy D-cell batteries. Right. That's exactly right. You bet. Good thought. And that was probably a whole lot of those harvest rates, along with we had a BPOP that year of 11.5 million continental mallards. That didn't include Great Lakes ducks. I remember it because I've studied it a bunch. It's been 21 years ago now. God dang, I'm getting old. But that was a heck of a year for a variety of those reasons.
Right, and really marks kind of the heyday in breeding population and a lot of other factors in regards to mallards. I think we're, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but we may be looking at kind of the downhill effect of some of that, 21 years later. But definitely a high watermark for population.
No doubt.
We can sit here and talk for days on these subjects. I know it was the reason the first State of Waterfowl I think we ended up with 22 videos, and they lasted forever, and ton of information. But, you know, here again, we could talk all night long, but we want this to kind of just be an open introductory of where we came from last year and get this whole discussion back going again. But we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. You know, crawfish is still an issue in Louisiana. We don't see that going away. Things are booming with the crawfish industry. That's having a huge effect. On a positive note, this discussion sparked a lot of conversation in Louisiana. There's been several meetings with NRCS, and we're looking at some better ways to maybe get some help in how to manage our fallow fields. We've got a lot of abandoned rice down here that the infrastructure is still there, but the fields hasn't been planted in 5 or 10 years. And so maybe we can create some incentives to moist soil manage some of that. And so I think there's been a lot of good out of this discussion. There's a lot to continue to talk about. And before we depart here tonight, and I know we've already been at it for a while, I definitely want to give Cason the opportunity to talk, because we had a big push on telemetry when we were talking back in the last summer, and a lot has evolved since then, and we've gained a lot of information from telemetry, and we're still moving forward. But Cason, you had a big group at your place here a couple of weeks ago and doing a bunch of banding. Why don't you give us a little recap of some of the telemetry work you guys did there at your place?
Yeah, so we were able last fall, I think we deployed 14 units on WhiteFronts, and then put out an additional 12 just about 2 weeks ago. We also got out about 20 units on mallards in February. So we didn't get to see a whole lot as far as, well, certainly no site fidelity, but we didn't see a lot of local use from the mallards as they were on their way out when we put those units on. We'll circle back to that in a minute. We did see some interesting things of note with the WhiteFronts. Really amazing to me, from someone that's been in the same spot as long as I have been and watched that population grow to what it is today. I was really shocked to see how much they trade back and forth, even to, you know, northern Louisiana, Mississippi Delta. They move a lot. They move frequently, more than I ever expected. You know, we start catching birds in October, and the general feeling is that, okay, we're stopping these birds. They're staying here. They're pretty loyal to us, but it's really more a revolving door. Even this year, you know, we're getting ready to go. We're watching birds, and we see some units come in that were banding down at Rockefeller. They come in, land in our rest pond, spend 3 days there, pick up and leave before we ever fire our nets, and they're back south down your part of the world again. So it's really interesting to see what we think is kind of a stationary flock. You know, like you're seeing the same birds every day is really not the case. It's steady influx and ingress and egress of birds. And one thing of note that's kind of alarming that we may need to talk more about, with the mallards, we saw an unusually high mortality rate, a little over 2 times what AHM factors for mortality rate on mallards. And, you know, we talked about the heyday, we talked about class of 99 and all those things a few minutes ago when AHM set 6 and 60. And if we're wrong, if the mortality rate is over 2 times what that factors for, then maybe that's the explanation of why we're not killing the mallards that we used to. Louisiana's not killing the mallards that they used to. It could explain where these paper ducks, if you will, these 4 million birds are missing. They could be missing from the BPOP. Or there's a lot more to it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that would look at that and say, well, you know, that's a small sample size. And absolutely, it's a really small sample size. And we put transmitters on them. So does that affect their ability to escape predation? Sure, it does. But if there's more to it, if it is real, then perhaps we should look further into that.
Yeah, and you talked about not seeing kind of a local population that birds are influxing. You know, one of the Gross Savant went ahead and did the post from, you know, Paul Lincoln, one of the studies did the blue-winged teal, that we now have documented that bird going all the way to South America and then turn around and coming back and didn't follow the same path back up. It actually kind of made a big loop down Florida and Cuba. So, you know, we know these birds aren't just, when we say they moved, they can move a long way. And so this telemetry stuff's really encouraging. And I know there's going to be some more data coming out soon. So we Cason has spent a lot of time on this, and want to thank you for hosting and doing what all you do up there, because a lot of transmitters have been deployed from your place. So anyway, go ahead, Jim.
Well, back on it, not to beat the dead horse, that telemetry stuff is very interesting because you get to see so much about where they go and what they do. You talk about the specs, they get here, they go to South Louisiana, they come back. Or the ones you talked about from a couple of years ago, Doug, they put transmitters on at Grove Savon, and they went to Mississippi and back to Louisiana and to up here, and they just move so much. Ducks also. But back on the disturbing part there is when you look at that hen mortality that they're kind of seeing a little bit of, even though it's a small sample. It'll be interesting to see what happens this next year if we're able to do the BPOP again, the BPOP survey, to see how that trend goes. Thank you, Kerry. To see how that trend, if it continues like that, we got an issue. We need to do something about it. If not, we need to find out, is it the transmitters causing the mortality or what the problem is? But I'm really looking forward to next year, hoping we can do the breeding duck survey again, as we always have, to see if there's any trends in that, and to see how, we know that moving on a little bit, we know that water on the prairies affects recruitment and breeding. It also affects bird mortality on the wintering grounds. If we've got good water conditions in Arkansas, Louisiana, ducks got more places to go hide. Gives us more opportunity to hunt public ground, but also gives ducks more opportunity to feed, to hide, to rest, and stay away from pressure.
You mentioned water right there, Jimbo. That's one of the things that may be the most alarming to me in regards to mortality rate there. The Dakotas have probably never experienced the early water, the nesting. There was plenty of water up there this year. So what's causing that mortality rate to be that high? And I think, habitat conditions, you look at wetland drainage, CRP contracts are not in anymore. You've got a lot of little factors moving there, but it's not just in mallards either. You start looking at WhiteFronts and the stuff we're seeing there. AHM assumes that every adult WhiteFront will nest annually. It's every one. What we're seeing is a little bit closer to the Greenland numbers. We're looking at possibly every third year that an adult will actually nest. So, a lot of observations, especially in our part of the world, Northeast Arkansas is, oh man, the Specs are going to turn into snow geese, their population's out of control. But we're not seeing the recruitment there either as far as the nesting attempt. So, these models are only as good as the information that you're putting into them. So what's the old saying, garbage in, garbage out? So there's some eye-opening things happening there.
That's a good point. Speaking of specs, and we'll come back around to the rest of it, but, watching those specs we've had at the house, man, they roosting on that field there just south of me. Talk about a cool show in the evening, or wake up in the morning to hear specklebellies hitting the field there at your bedroom window. That's cool. But it appears like, just watching, I've seen a lot of juvies in the population, in the bunch that's been around the house, lots of juvies. So maybe we had a pretty good spec hatch this year.
We've seen the same thing, a fair number of juvies, even when we were banding, sitting there. The general rule all summer was that the breeding success was very low, but you start putting eyes on the flock and you can see it. They're there plain as day, family groups. So definitely surprised to see that, and pleased too. That's a good sign.
Mm-hmm. We can always hope.
Well, this thing's kind of wrapping down. Do you guys have anything y'all want to bring to the table before we start to close this out? Any last comments or anything?
Well, I kind of hit on it just a minute ago, but want to come back around to it. Water conditions, how they can affect hunting pressure and breeding population. So I'm curious, Doug, do you ever pay attention to, say, on years, if we've got big water in Arkansas, if we've got overflow conditions in the White and Cache River basins by me, at Black River, if all those are favorable with overbank flooding, can you tell if that affects Louisiana or not, or South Louisiana? I would think not, but I would think it affects the difference in what Cason and I see. But that's just my gut feeling.
Yeah. I actually, it is a very interesting point because, and maybe we could get somebody to make a study on that. I don't know how you would do it, but when guys down here in Louisiana, I think at least myself, the more I pay attention through the State of Waterfowl series, is you start realizing that there's a lot more to this than just a couple of things. The dynamics of why ducks do what they do is huge. And just what you said with water in Arkansas, whether it's proven or not, there are effects on what happens down here to some level. And so I think when we wake up and we go get in a duck blind and we don't kill a limit, we don't begin to think about all that. Cason?
Yeah, I got two comments there. One, Jimbo, you mentioned hunting pressure there. In regards to telemetry, absolutely eye-opening, mind-blowing to go back and look at all the WhiteFronts we marked last year and look at 14 days prior to opening day of waterfowl, big duck season, goose season, everything, and then look at their movements 3 days after that. And the disturbance from just the duck hunters, the traffic, everything, I mean, they picked up and scattered. They just don't do well with that much pressure. And then to go a little bit further, talking overbank flooding and water conditions, it would be really interesting to look at that long term as far as harvest numbers. And if you could go back and look at river stage and see kind of that correlation in between the two, I think that would be eye-opening. And I think your comment was that they're not doing this by accident. The birds know and understand a lot more than what we do. So this was February last year. I think we had 2 or 3 hunter recovery units we were trying to redeploy. And if you look at the Louisiana birds that were still staying south in Louisiana, and then our birds in Arkansas that we had released early, and then some that we redeployed, they moved up to the ice line in the Midwest and stayed right there on the ice line until they were able to move on, go past that, and go back to the nesting ground. Because, we know in real estate, location, right? So the bird that gets back to the nesting ground first gets the best location, closest to the water, best habitat, they're going to have the best success. So the difference, from what I understand, the difference between the South Louisiana birds that stayed in the South until they absolutely had to leave was that their body condition was a lot worse. They'd been disturbed more all year. They'd flown more. They didn't have, the waist grain or so forth that maybe you had in Arkansas. But the eye-opening thing to me is that they knew the difference. The birds that were south of us knew they had to hold tight and had to wait to the last minute. The birds that were further north knew that their body condition was good enough that they could go up there and make a living for a week or two on the ice line until they could go ahead and move on. It's not accidental. I mean, they know what's going on. They know what it takes to be successful in recruitment.
Do you think some of that is natural selection also, to where the good Lord made it or Mother Nature made it where some of them's going to go early, and on the right years they'll be able to take advantage of those early nesting attempts, be the first one there. At the same time, the lollygaggers need to have some lollygaggers, because what if his first batch fails? What if they fail and a bad weather system hits? And, there's some talk about a big freeze that killed a bunch of the snow geese or something this past year. So is there something to that, to where if they all went at the same time, they wouldn't be as effective as if it was scattered? Just throwing it out there.
I think so. I mean, certainly, all things are by design, and I definitely think that that's a good point there, that you could, if they were all staged at the same time, you could run the risk of a massive casualty. Yeah, to your point, I heard the same reports, snow geese and even WhiteFronts that had a lot of issue this year, as far as called it extremely late cold front that they basically starved to death. They didn't have any food up there. So I guess, if you had everything staged there at one time, you could see a big issue there. And then two, you run a lot higher risk of cholera outbreak, in warm weather and different stuff when they all stage up together. So I'm sure that dispersion and different, not life cycles, but different habits are probably their own way of fighting that occurrence. I mean, you look at the size of the flocks I've seen this past week, and we're talking warm weather like that, I mean, they're all staged up, roosting in one spot. It's 82 degrees. I mean, that's a cholera outbreak waiting to happen.
Okay. Using the field there by the house as an example again, I got some pictures, man, they're in there thick. It's just you know how to get, it's just a black ball out there, water, 6-8 inches deep and at 80 degrees. You can smell it, get a south wind. That field kind of stinks a little bit from all the bird use on it.
Yeah, it's amazing farming side note of that. Most of the places they roost on us, we don't ever have to add potash because the litter count is so high from them. A lot of folks don't think about stuff like that, but you stack that many birds in one area, you're toting kind of a fine line there.
Good point.
Yeah, well, here again, one subject leads to another. That's what the whole purpose of the State of Waterfowl is. It's a big science and a lot involved in it, and hopefully we can continue to relay some of this to the public. We're actually filming this right now, and it's I don't even know what day it is. Either Wednesday or Thursday.
I hope it's Wednesday. I hope it's Wednesday.
Today's Wednesday. I don't even know my days. And we open on Saturday. So we had a youth season. Youth weekend was last weekend. Heard a report from a couple of guys that went out, and the kids actually shot a few birds. So even though we're not seeing a lot in the area, there was a flight in the morning early. So we'll know this Saturday what Louisiana looks like. And so we're excited to get out there and quit thinking about a hurricane for a few days and go experience a sunrise and shoot a few ducks. So when does y'all season open there in Arkansas?
The 21st.
All right. Well, good. Well, we're hoping to do a bunch more of these series. This is just kind of a resurrection of what we had already started last summer. And hopefully we can continue to get this going. And again, want to thank Xpress Boats for all of the time and effort that they put into it. They host this series and produce it and provide all of the necessary things to make it happen. And thank you guys for your time, and want to give a big shout out to all the waterfowl hunters out there that are watching this, and good luck with this upcoming season. And hopefully you'll share this series with all of your friends to watch. Whether you agree with everything that's said on here or not, we try to present the most factual information. And here again, we're not trying to tell you we obviously give our opinions, but we want you to formulate your own based on the information that we're sharing with you. And so we want you to get this out and share it on Facebook or social media or whatever platform this thing is on. So tell your friends about it. And hopefully in the next month or so, we can get together and talk about all the successful hunts we've had and what's going on, and give you an update on what kind of season we're having. Cason, Jim, thank y'all. Be
Appreciate
safe.
it.
Jim, I know you're fixing to travel, so be careful on the highway.
I'll do it, buddy. I'll have a good report for you next week.
All right. Well, thank y'all. Hopefully we can see y'all in a few weeks, maybe up there. We can come kill a duck with y'all, and vice versa. Hopefully we see you down here in Louisiana soon.
Always look forward to getting back to Gros Savant.
All right. Thank you, guys. Stay tuned to the next episode, and we'll get back to you. Thank y'all.